Hi folks, Steve here, and let's talk through Gimme Shelter, the Rolling Stones film, which is considered as really one of the great rock and roll documentaries. Also one of the great observational documentaries, if you sort of want to talk about Bill Nichols' modes. And there is some controversy about the film, and there is some real issues with the film and ethics. And even if you don't like the Rolling Stones, what is actually going on in this film and the way that a particular murder and the aftermath of a murder is depicted or not depicted really does raise a series of questions about the documentary form and about the observational form. So I think there's actually a lot in this film to unpack beyond just it being a film that really captures the Rolling Stones at the height of their power. Now, the ethical issue of the film is this: it depicts the the stabbing of Meredith Hunter, who was at a Rolling Stones concert, which is a free concert, and it um, it doesn't really unpack the murder in any satisfactory way in regard to looking at the murder from Meredith Hunter's point of view or his family's point of view. And they were really, really furious with the filmmakers of this film in the way that he was depicted. And also the Hells Angels, who were basically hired by the Rolling Stones to act as security for one of their for this actual concert, and they're not really depicted at all. Now, so the problem is the film is only interested in the Rolling Stones and the Rolling Stones' reaction to the murder. Now, the murder, it's like it's sort of it's the it's discussed across the film by the Rolling Stones. Like you hear kind of radio interviews and people's responses and all of that to the and you see the Rolling Stones actually listening and responding to this, right? But as far as actually depicting, say, the murder and the aftermath and things like that, it's not really interested in that at all. Now, the problem is, if you actually look at this poster and look at the tagline, it says the music that thrilled the world and the killing that stunned it. But the killing isn't really depicted in a satisfactory way. And I think that's really interesting. This is another image which was actually used as a promotional poster for the film. So this is actually the moment, right? What you're seeing here are Hell's Angels, who were the security for the concert, right, holding pool sticks, and they're clubbing Meredith Hunter to death. Meredith Hunter pulled out a gun at the concert, and the Hells Angels basically just beat him to death. Right now, this is a still from that moment, and it's being used to promote the film. So you could ask some questions about what is actually being used to promote the film and whether that is actually, well, firstly, is it in good taste? And I think it's fair to say that it's probably not in good taste, regardless of what you think. But also the ethical ramifications around this actual moment. And although we do see the footage and kind of we are re-shown the footage, the film doesn't really spend a lot of time with this moment, which I think in itself is really interesting. Okay, so the tagline of the film is the Rolling Stones gave a concert in Altamont. The Hells Angels policed it. 4 people died. This is the actual film story. So what you kind of get is, yeah, well, it's the actual film story because the film is sort of based around the fact that they've actually got the footage of the murder, and the footage was actually used in a court case and a trial for the Hells Angels. One of the Hells Angels security guys who was charged with the murder, and he was actually exonerated because of that. Now, when we're talking about Bill Nichols and particular modes, it's definitely got the performative conventions going on with. The film is really about the Rolling Stones performing, and very early you've got this great footage of the Rolling Stones on stage, and it's quite incredible. The Stones had never been really captured on stage in a concert like this before, and for that reason, the footage is extremely seminal and important. And it's also interesting in the way that it sets up a film about these particular social actors and these particular celebrities. It also looks at the observational conventions, and this is where the film has been criticised the most because, I mean, I'll get to that in a couple of seconds, but the film almost, I mean, this is the criticism for the film, that it refuses to actually make a stance against the Hells Angels and their involvement in the concert. Like, why on earth were the Hells Angels even there being security for a concert, right? The filmmakers themselves refusing to actually make a stand, the filmmakers refusing to actually criticize the Rolling Stones and their involvement in the film, and also the criticism for the filmmakers actually not looking beyond just kind of the vacuum of the Rolling Stones. You don't see talking heads here, you don't see interviews, you don't see anything like that. And this has become a real problem, that if you're actually going to depict a murder, you're going to have to look at different perspectives. So if you think of films like Capturing the Freedmans and The Thin Blue Line, which is actually about criminal acts, then those films rightly and ethically use interviews to actually unpack actually what's going on. This film does not do that, and that is the real problem of its observational conventions. And a lot of people who criticise the film, which I'll talk about in a sec, criticise the film because they think the film relies too heavily on the observational. Okay. In the film, what you've got is a film set up where only the Rolling Stones can respond to the murder, right? So Aaron Taylor, who wrote this great article on it, which is this week's reading, he says the observational convention of a concealed apparatus is at best a fastidiously ambiguous response to the viewer's helplessness before historical catastrophe. At worst, its reflexivity is merely an attempt to justify its exploitation of the footage that depicts the killing of a young concert goer, Meredith Hunter, by the Hells Angels, Alan Passero, during the Altamont Speedway free concert. Right? So his whole point is that the observational actually doesn't go very deep into unpacking the moment, which, like you were saying earlier, the film is actually promoting itself on. He's saying that this is not actually a film about Meredith Hunter. This is not a film actually about the moment that it's promoting itself to be about. This is actually a film that's just celebrating the Rolling Stones. Now, a social actor requires the filmmaker to exercise a duty of care towards individuals in reality. So a claim could be made that the filmmakers do not fairly represent all of the social actors in this film, right? Like, you've got a lot of the Rolling Stones, but you don't have any of Meredith Hunter. The film doesn't go into any detail to actually look at Meredith Hunter and his life and the things that kind of led him to actually be pulling out a gun at the Rolling Stones concerts. So viewers owe social actors a critical duty of care to take filmmakers to task if they callously or intentionally manipulate their subjects, particularly if these subjects are anonymous and or financially disadvantaged by this act. Right? So you could actually make a claim that the Hells Angels were depicted so appallingly by this film that it actually it shattered any chance of them actually being left alone from this moment. The Hells Angels were really, really demonized and vilified because of this film, and they were furious with the Stones and Mick Jagger's response directly after the murder. But after this film came out, they actually set out to assassinate Mick Jagger. And there's a number of stories about some failed attempts in the Hells Angels actually doing things to try and get Mick Jagger killed because they were so furious with the way that Jagger and the film represented. I think the real victim of the film, well, obviously the real victim of the film is Meredith Hunter. And the question is he fairly represented in this film? Okay. The film has no interest in the circumstances that led to the Angels adopting the role of security at Altamont, and the Stones are never questioned for why this happened. Why did they hire the Rolling Stones for this concert? Now, something that a lot of people don't like about the film is it doesn't have an ending. So the murder happens, and then there's a bit of aftermath, and then it just sort of stops. The film kind of stops, and it feels odd where the film actually leaves us. And I think a lot of people will walk out of this film feeling not shortchanged, um, but feeling that there was sort of a second part of the film to come. The film only goes for 90 minutes, and there is a feeling that another 40 minutes at least could have been added on to this film to really flesh out Meredith Hunter and the Angels and give them the real representation that maybe they deserved. So, what is the stance towards the helplessness of the viewer in relation to the exposed and suffering social actor? And are they actually given any representation in the film? Another criticism that some have is the film's kind of in two halves, and you've got the first half where it's just this wonderful live footage of the Rolling Stones and footage of them recording Sticky Fingers, which is this great album which they produced. Because of the film and because of the second half and because of the murder and all of that, some people feel that the first half, where it's just the Stones having a great time, that footage is actually in poor taste. And if you're actually going to do a film about a concert goer who is murdered at the concert, that actually has to take over the film. And you can't, it's not like the film pretends that didn't happen, or the film is saying, well, this concert footage is before this murder, because right from the start we know where the film's going because it sets that up. It sets that up very early. So you could ask some questions about the use of this footage and what's going on. And clearly the filmmakers are interested in Mick Jagger and fetishizing Mick Jagger in regard to the other Rolling Stones. And regardless of whether this footage is just incredible, which it is, the real question is, if you're actually going to do a film about what actually went on, is it actually in good taste to actually be including this early footage? Okay, so must the filmmakers make a stand? And I think that's really worth thinking about in this film, and thinking about Richard Porton's article where he says actually it is. Mailers and Zuen refuse to provide summative explanations for the outbreak of violence and murder that they document. So think about that. They don't provide summative explanations, and that's what he thinks that they should have been doing. Thus, this is more of the quote, thus the presence and voice of a filmmaker signifies his or her ethical and political commitment, or lack thereof, to the pro-filmic events in which he is engaged. So, Porton's saying that the film really had to be more critical, right? Not necessarily of even including the Hells Angels. It actually had to be critical of the social actors. It had to be critical of the Rolling Stones, and it had to be challenging and questioning the Rolling Stones in this film. And he argues that the film clearly doesn't do that in a satisfactory way, and there are some ethical issues going on with that. So the film is constructed as a film within a film, so it's basically a series of flashbacks. So we know at the beginning what happens at the end, right? So the film is really about leading us to this moment at the end, right? And making sense of this moment, right? So as an audience, and really think about yourself as an audience, as an ethical audience, and where you're positioned in the film, right? You're the knowing audience, you're the knowing subject. And really, let's unpack that term, knowing subject, and what that actually means. That we're actually, it's not a film where, like, Searching for Sugar Man, where it's revealed that Sugar Man's still alive, and it's revealed that hey, he's really popular in South Africa. It's not a film like that. It's a film that says from the start, this happened. This is the Rolling Stones responding to it, and we know that, so we're going along with that. So what that allows us to do is create empathy for the Rolling Stones, because we're kind of going along this narrative with them. We're going along this journey with them. It's revelatory look of the Stones as they watch themselves has a crucial instructive function, right? And think about what that crucial instructive function is. It invites a group of celebrities, being the Rolling Stones, to become more conscientious about how they are perceived by others. So what you get from this film is, oh, the Rolling Stones, they're good guys because this happened, this terrible thing happened, but here you've got the Rolling Stones, looking quite shocked about it and being quite shocked about it, and you've got Mick Jagger kind of shaking his head, watching the footage of the murder, just saying it's awful. I mean, you kind of walk out thinking, hey, the Rolling Stones are pretty good guys here, which is a real problem. So the film As Truth, the footage of the murder was actually used firstly to charge a Hell's Angels security for murder, and then actually exonerate him when the footage was unpacked a little bit more, which is really, really fascinating, right? So a question to ask yourself when you're watching the film is, does the film exonerate the Stones of guilt? Now, what you don't have in this film is typical Rolling Stones things. No sex, no drugs, just hard-working rock professionals, right? They're projecting this particular image of the Stones, which, I mean, we kind of get that image now, but in 1970, that was definitely not the image of the Rolling Stones. So the film is constructing a particular look and a particular image of the Rolling Stones. And if you want to contrast to the representation of the Stones in this film, I highly recommend that you have a look at the film titled Cocksucker Blues, which is actually been never officially released because the Stones have refused to release it, but it actually shows the Stones with a lot of sex and a lot of drugs, and that typical representation of the Stones. Now, the Hells Angels are depicted as thugs and drunks and bullies, and is that actually fair? Are they actually given their due? And the early concert footage plays in contrast to the reality of the second. And like I said, is that a problem? But then think, why is that footage there? And the footage is probably there because what it's actually trying to do is exonerate the Stones of guilt of this murder. What the film seems to be doing is saying the Stones were just a rock band and they played rock concerts, and this one bad thing happened at one of their concerts, but the Stones do many concerts, and it's not like this happens at every one of their concerts. So, can they really be fairly, blamed for really what's going on here? Okay, so just a final thought here. It should be clear that documentaries are a record of the filmmaker's regard for the subject. So, Aaron Taylor's piece is really about this. That what he's saying is the observational mode, it's not just putting a camera down and just letting the social actors go. It's actually concentrating on particular social actors and the way that those social actors are framed, and the way that the filmmakers allow them to perform particular ideas about themselves, and whether the film actually challenges them is is the real interest. And when think of the Thin Blue Line and the way that Errol Morris is actually challenging particular people from that film to behave in a different sort of way, right? So the camera's gaze communicates a filmmaker's political intentions and moral values. So think of the intentions of the filmmakers and this film, and actually what's going on in the way that the Rolling Stones are really fetishized here. And just one final quote from Aaron Taylor: "One comes to Gimme Shelter for the confluence of stardom and murder, and leaves troubled by its moral evasiveness, its willingness to penetrate the world and then let it bleed." Let it bleed, of course, being a reference to a Rolling Stones song and the album. But think about that, right? The evasiveness. So what Aaron Taylor is saying is the film sets up this problem, this murder that happens at a Rolling Stones concert, this brutal, brutal stabbing and murder. And then when it sets that up, when it actually shows you the footage, when it actually sets that up, the film just kind of ends there. And he's saying it actually leaves a really bad taste in your stomach, that really the film is not ethical and truthful for, firstly, the social actors that it's representing, and really Meredith Hunter is the focus and the center of this film, and the film really doesn't do him or anyone else around him justice, apart from the Rolling Stones, who are exonerated, and also the audience is asked to empathize with them and this sort of precarious situation that they were put in. Okay, that's all I'll say. Give Me Shelter. It's a hell of a film, and there's so much to unpack here, certainly around ethics and really what's going on with the filmmaker's motivations as much as the audience responses to it. And it will be great to see it in the cinema, just to see how we all respond to it. Okay, leave it there. See you soon.